that's something that's really misunderstood about domestic violence, physical violence, intimate partner violence. We call it violence, and people think, oh, that's hitting, punching, kicking, raping. Domestic abuse, domestic and family violence, as we call it where I live in Queensland, is a series of all sorts of controlling and manipulative behaviours. Sometimes people don't experience any physical or sexual abuse. They will only experience the coercive behaviours. So it's trying to control and dominate someone. It's limiting their access to finances. It's telling them what to wear. It's limiting their access to friends and family. It's often using children. It can be in the case of when it's happening where a man is perpetrating the violence against a woman, it can be using that male privilege, that man box, those sort of behaviours that we've been raised with in our society, that as a woman you're supposed to stay home, you're supposed to look after the kids, do the ironing, the washing, the cooking.
Today, we're welcoming our guest, Tess Raby. She's all the way from Australia. Hi, Tess.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. We greatly appreciate you coming and speaking with us. And in meeting Tess, I think we have a lot of key takeaways from today's meeting is navigating shame, navigating something that's incredibly uncomfortable and moving away from what is familiar for us, that's comfortable, that may not be necessarily in our best interests, and just really hearing her journey in navigating her experience with domestic abuse and using the wisdom of that traumatic experience. The wisdom of healing has gifted her to give back to the community and really, use put out ripples to really create awareness around what this is so we can invite more optimal pathways for people. So I can't thank you enough for being here today, and we really look forward to you sharing your story.
Maybe we can start with just giving us a quick, introduction of yourself, more like from a life perspective, right? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Where'd you start? Where are you from?
From a life perspective, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I was born in Melbourne, which is a big city in Australia, in southern Australia, and I'm now living in Brisbane. I had a pretty good upbringing, great parents, a brother who was, a bit annoying like brothers are, but we're pretty good friends now.
What? So. A brother who's annoying? Never heard of that.
Heard of the job title.
Yeah, right. My parents have had a really, really loving relationship, and they're still both alive. They live around the corner. They're in their 70s, and they still hold hands when they walk on the beach and cuddle on the couch. So I grew up surrounded by love, the love of my parents, my brother, my grandparents. Life took me on a bit of a journey, I guess. I met my ex-husband when I was quite young, so I was about 21 when I met him and fell in love with him. He lived in Papua New Guinea for a while, and I was living in Australia. It was pretty hard to do that long-distance relationship. We ended up getting married in Melbourne and then moving to the UK for a couple of years, where our eldest daughter was born. From there, we moved back to Australia, where our youngest daughter was born. We then moved to Dubai, so we lived in Dubai.
Oh,
wow. And then ended up coming back to Australia, back to Brisbane. So I live in Brisbane, which is about halfway up if you think of the map of Australia. So getting up to the hot bit. So my relationship with my ex-husband was tumultuous from the beginning, I think. And I ended up realising many, many years later, we were married for about 15 years, that what I was actually experiencing was domestic abuse or domestic violence. It's tricky. When you're young and all you've experienced is love and respect and beautiful relationships around you, that's what you just expect the world to be, right? Mm-hmm. You just walk into the world trusting that everything's going to be great. I was very privileged. My parents had enough money. I was well educated. I lived in a nice house, all of that sort of thing. So I just thought that that's the way the world was. What happened with my relationship with him was that it was very disrespectful very early on and very controlling, but the way he sold that control to me was love. So I love you so much. I don't want you to go out with other people. Like, I don't want you to go out for drinks after work because I want to spend all my time with you. And I actually misunderstood the control that comes with domestic abuse and saw it as love. He was
But
just
you're
so.
young too, right?
I
This is
was in
like
my
your
early
first
20s.
major relationship, probably, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's I think that's one of the things that is common to
Yeah.
people's stories of domestic abuse is that the control in the early days is sold as it's jealousy, right? But it's sold as love. You're so
Hmm.
beautiful that I wouldn't want
Don't
you
wear those
to.
clothing. You're too
Yeah,
attractive in it. That kind
yeah.
of,
It came down
yeah.
to when we go out for dinner, I had to face the wall in a
Yep.
restaurant because I was so beautiful that it wasn't a good idea for my face to be out there for other people.
So,
So
so Tess, is this
Hmm.
like a behavior that you noticed after you got married, or was it something you noticed before you got married?
it
This
actually,
started early.
yeah, unfortunately, it happened before I got married, and it is interesting. I'm still friends with the people that I worked with when I met him, and that's 25, 28 years of friendship there, and they now say that they wondered what was wrong with him. They didn't like the way that he treated me. They didn't like the way that he behaved towards me, but nobody ever said
No one
anything.
said anything.
No.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what it was. I guess they're very uncomfortable conversations to have with people, and that's why my life has taken me down this path where I now teach people how to have those conversations. How do you bring this up with someone? How do you support someone through this? And it's that relationship with him, which was horrendous. And I was married to him for about 15 years. So it was a long time to go through that. But I have chosen now to see it as a gift.
One of the things that I'm always curious about is why is it that when and I've been through similar experiences where I didn't catch signs early enough on so many things, forget about relationships, but and we're intelligent people and all this stuff, that we didn't catch signs. But was there anything, since you've had this wonderful experience with your parents and your upbringing and your family, was there a part of you initially that sort of looked at it and thought, that's different, or I didn't see my parents do this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There were all sorts of signs that I even spoke to him about, but he convinced me that the reason he was behaving like that was because he loved me. There was all sorts of really jealous, really obsessive behaviors that were going on. He was limiting my contact with friends and family from a very, very early stage and
Hmm.
controlling where I went. This is before mobile phones. Of course, it got worse once we got that kind of
Yeah.
technology.
Did you know the escalation happen after the marriage? That it seems to be a
Um,
theme for a lot of people.
the escalation, yeah, it was a big change when we had our first baby,
Yeah,
but
babies. Yep.
there was this like acts of sexual assault before we were married in the relationship. So there was stuff going on that I was so uncomfortable with and really upset by at times. I'd cry and I
Yeah.
talked to friends about some of it, and some of it was very intimate. What he'd done to me, um,
Yeah.
and they said, oh, that doesn't sound nice. That sounds awful, and then they kind of left it. So
And I think, was your experience that people, I think sometimes people don't realize that you can be sexually assaulted when you're in a relationship with
oh,
someone.
yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
did you find that there was kind of that disconnect in people's reaction? Because if you were sexually assaulted by someone who was a stranger to you, for example, or maybe not someone you're in a relationship with, I feel like
Yeah,
that's received differently by people.
absolutely. And I run now domestic and family violence specialist workplace training and bystander programs and all sorts of things in my professional life. And one of the things I say to people is really it's incredibly unlikely that there is a domestically abusive relationship that doesn't contain some
Yeah.
element of sexual assault. Because when you think about it, if somebody has that much power and control over you and you're frightened of them, are you going to say no?
You can't say no, or
No,
it's not worth the fight, right? Or
exactly.
for,
No,
yeah,
it's a very, very common,
the
and
form of coercion. Yeah.
it's a really awkward conversation, and people find it really hard to talk about. And I didn't talk about it for years, but I have had to step into my discomfort about what happened to me in order to educate other people, because I do not want other people to think that this is okay or normal. I have 2 daughters. I do not want them to ever think that they have to have sex with someone just because they're in a relationship with them or just because they're married to them. But it is really, really uncomfortable for me to have those conversations, and it's something I've worked through for a long time to be able to actually articulate it.
Yeah. And I love what you said there, the stepping into discomfort, because that's something I say a lot in my work as well, is if you healing and the wisdom of healing comes from sitting with the discomfort and learning how to swim in it, right? And so when did you first see yourself, I guess at what point was the point that you started to look at, I needed to step into my discomfort? Like when was that? Because that's a hard place to get to.
What I'm wondering is, even before that was, where there's in situations like this, I would think, I'm guessing, and I'd love for you to share. Is it more than one type of abuse as well? Is it something other than physical? Are there other ways in which abuse takes place, and is that something you also noticed as well?
Absolutely. And I'm really pleased that you brought that up, Mohammed, because that's something that's really misunderstood about domestic violence, physical violence, intimate partner violence. We call it violence, and people think, oh, that's hitting, punching, kicking, raping. Domestic abuse, domestic and family violence, as we call it where I live in Queensland, is a series of all sorts of controlling and manipulative behaviours. Sometimes people don't experience any physical or sexual abuse. They will only experience the coercive behaviours. So it's trying to control and dominate someone. It's limiting their access to finances. It's telling them what to wear. It's limiting their access to friends and family. It's often using children. It can be in the case of when it's happening where a man is perpetrating the violence against a woman, it can be using that male privilege, that man box, those sort of behaviours that we've been raised with in our society, that as a woman you're supposed to stay home, you're supposed to look after the kids, do the ironing, the washing, the cooking. Those sort of things are used as well. So it's a huge spectrum of behaviours. But I think the important thing for people to realise is it's a pattern of behaviour. It's not a one-off. We all have arguments with our partners. We all have arguments with our kids and our parents. It's not one argument. And it's not if you have an argument or a disagree with someone and it's resolved respectfully. It's a pattern of behaviours and they cause fear. So there'll be a power imbalance in the relationship and there'll be the presence of fear. And that's a really important differentiation from perhaps what's even an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah.
It's that fear.
Was it constantly, bad? Were there moments where you're like, oh, look at that, he's actually an actually loving, caring person? Because there would be say flowers or whatever else, sweet gestures that you could use maybe even as evidence to yourself to say, nah, there is a side to him. Or if you were to flip it, her, whoever, the partner, or the other side of that relationship, to say, look, those are good qualities and I see goodness there and let's focus in on that? Or was it constantly terrible? Or like, what was the mix like? Like, did you see other characteristics?
Again, you've raised a really good point. So it tends to follow some kind of cycle, right? There tends to be this feeling of there's something in the air, something's not right, the tension builds, you're walking on eggshells, you know that something just doesn't feel right. Then there's an explosion. That can be going for weeks, for days, for hours, or it might be a one-off, throwing something, yelling, something like that. Then there's this kind of phase where it's either remorse, where they realise they've done the wrong thing, these people, and then they give gifts and things like that, or it's that victim blaming. So it's that I would never have done that, had have had the kids bathed on time, that kind of thing, that, shifting the blame onto the victim. And then what happens, Mohammed, is often after that is the time when someone decides that they want to leave. They recognise that the behaviours are terrible. They might recognise that they are domestic abuse and they decide to leave. At that point, that person comes back in And sometimes we'll offer to go to counselling, we'll buy gifts, you might go on a family holiday. In my case, I remember I would think, oh, he let me buy shoes, or he let me buy underwear. Let me.
I know. It's like a win. It's like, oh, I got a jacket. Like,
Right.
yeah. It's like, oh my God.
And then, of course, I think there's something really important that's really misunderstood about this, is that people will say, why didn't you leave?
Yeah.
Why did you put up with it for all that time? Well, part of it is because of that cycle I just explained. Part of it is because exactly what you said, Mohammed, is not bad every single day of your life.
No.
But the other piece that's missing is love. I loved him. I fell in love with him. I had his children. We got married. To me, marriage is forever. Marriage is a commitment that you make to someone to never, ever, ever go away from them or break up with them, because my grandparents had stayed married, my parents, like, I didn't think I'd ever be on the side of divorce. So that love piece, though, is so important, because then what often happens is they will use all sort of coercive tactics to keep you in the relationship. In my relationship, he threatened to kill himself if I left.
I'm not sure what the statistics are there. I haven't looked at the coroner's reports here in Ontario, the province where we're calling you from, but there's a very high, I want to say it was 63 or 69. I can't get the percentile right, but of the domestic homicides in our province, 63 or 69% of them, I think this was the statistics from 2019, and that there was such a high ratio of correlation between domestic homicide and suicide and separation and divorce.
Yeah.
And so I think that is such an important thing, because even though he's saying that, and he may or may not have taken actionable steps toward it, when they are in that place, or you're in that place of wanting to experience to leave, that's where there's an increased risk of violence toward himself or the other, right? It's such, so even though it's a control tactic to keep you there, it's also a very real threat.
It is. It's in Australia, it's the same. The highest risk time is the point of separation and the couple of months following that. And the violence escalates because the person perpetrating the violence is losing control. Domestic abuse is all about power and control. That's the whole sector of it. So with me, the violence and abuse was skyrocketed post-separation. In fact, there were many times that I thought it would just be easier to go back to him, but my family stopped me. If I hadn't had that family support around, I would have gone back. It was so much harder than I could have imagined, but I'm lucky. I'm sitting here.
Yeah.
Every week in Australia, women are losing their lives, and
100%.
It's global, and they're not getting through that. They don't have the support and protection. So it is really important, if people are thinking about leaving a relationship, that they put in a safety plan, that they have some sort of safety plan in place that they've worked.
Yeah. And contingencies to the contingency, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's just it. Like, especially now, that you bring up that stat and you think about it, that's almost like an anchor, like knowing that, oh my gosh, if I go in that direction, the possibility of it getting worse, right? As from a danger point of view, itself can scare somebody into just staying in that situation, knowing that that's an actual stat now. So, over to you, Tess, before that separation time, did you, and I'm really just trying to get myself into your shoes there when you were then and there, so you say, you recall that it wasn't always, and just because that there are moments where there are, butterflies and, rainbows and laughter, how is it that you go from, because I wonder if you experienced this yourself and you started imagining to yourself, well, if I just did these things, and did you start to analyze going, hey, this is what led to like the happy moments, so let's do more of that kind of stuff, and try to problem solve your way through it, especially since marriage to you was an institution that you really wanted to keep, intact, right? And culturally it's out there, you till death do us part, like, like there's so many lines and so many things we learn about, like marriage and And that's one relationship, only one type of relationship in which there is abuse. It's not the only type of
No,
relationship
not
there's
at all.
abuse in, which we'll talk about as well. But the one we hear about the most is the one in marriages. But and in your case, this is what you found. But did you start problem solving and sort of saying to yourself, "Hey, if I did this differently, I could change outcomes"? And what were those things that you were thinking about? I'm just curious. Can
Oh,
you share?
absolutely. I spent most of my life walking on eggshells, is the
Yeah.
term we use. I'm sure you've heard it. So I spent most of my time thinking about how to please him and how to calm the kids down and how to make everything happy in the house. So I would like wash the floors obsessively, like 3 or 4 times a week. I would try and have dinner on the table when he came home. I'd always try and have the food that he wanted. The kids from the age, and actually one of his friends saw this when we were in Canada, ironically, and our little one was 2. And we were in a massive hotel room, and there was myself, my ex-husband, and my 2 daughters, and this friend, mate of ours, that was in the room as well. And he was so shocked at the way my 2-year-old behaved when her father was asleep. She knew by the age of 2 that she was not to make any noise and she was to creep around and not behave like a normal toddler, a normal 2-year-old, right? So the kids were starting to self regulate from a really young age as well when they were around him because they didn't want an explosion. So I can't pin down particular thought processes. It was like that was my life. My whole life. He was a pilot, so
Well, it's kind of like constantly filtering everything you're doing, looking for, is this going to set him off? Is this going to set him off? And trying to like mitigate potentialities for things to blow up that he might be activating him or triggering him. It's
yeah.
just, I think that's probably like I don't know, like that's what it's like a level of hypervigilance to control everything around you so you can control the uncontrollable chaos that's going to come down you if you can't control to make everything perfect. It's just, it's absolutely exhausting, and
But,
it's
but
constantly
Tess,
running.
like obviously you'd never been through this before. You'd never seen it being done before or experienced it. So the first times that you're starting to experience this, um, I wonder if sometimes, again, as a problem solver, as a people pleaser, like those kind of personalities that we often hear being on the other side of that,
Mm-hmm.
right, of that abuse, sort of say and take ownership of the situation, or sometimes kind of like dismiss it in a way and say, that's just his personality. Okay, so I'm just going to have to get used to it. And look, if I can do these things, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, with my situation, like for most of our relationship, he was away for periods. So I think I told you at the beginning, he worked in New Guinea. So I would be in Melbourne. It would be like really stressful when he was around, but we loved each other and it wasn't all bad. Like we'd go out for dinner and do nice things together, and he made me laugh, and we had friends around. There was good times. And then when we got married and had the kids and everything, he was a pilot, so he was away a lot of the time. So the girls and I actually ended up kind of living 2 separate lives. So we would be much more relaxed and have much more fun when he wasn't there, because when he was there, not that he was nasty all the time, but it was this constant
Eggshell.
anxiety of what might set him off, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the girls were noticeably different when he was home.
Did you did you ever say to yourself, look, he's under a lot of stress
Oh, yeah.
and he's got all these things to deal with, and almost sort of like start defending, the behavior, going, even if it's unacceptable, we start looking at it going, well, let me try to be empathetic. We hear these words nowadays, like let's be compassionate for what might even be the oppressor, right? And sort of say, like, what is that person going through? And sort of that did you have those feelings as well, to sort of keep you going on, or try to get you to empathize and find your balance in that?
Absolutely. I think I was trying to save him, to be honest. I am a people pleaser. I'm a really caring and empathetic person, and I really want to do good in the world. That's something that has always been been part of me. I've always wanted to help people. He came from a very abusive background. His mother was really abusive, very, very coercive and controlling to him. And I saw her do it to his dad as well. His dad would actually take me out down to the grocery store and buy me treats because he knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of control, and he knew that his son was not nice to me. So he grew up in abuse, right? And I wanted to help him through that. And I saw him as a victim. But what I've realised now is that it doesn't matter if you're a victim. You have choices, and this is a choice. It is your choice to behave like that. You can choose a path of going forward in your life, of making changes, of seeking help, of all of those type of things, or you can do what he did, which is
repeat the cycle.
We would repeat the cycle and we would go to a counsellor. I would say, this is it, I can't do it anymore. We'd go to a counsellor, we'd go for 2 or 3 sessions, they'd start to talk about his childhood, and all of a sudden it was the worst counsellor in the world. We could never go back. That was his choice. But I definitely saw myself as, like, in some way trying to save him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's rooted in love, right? And it's the father of your children. And what a, like, Trina, even we were saying, like, what a win this would be if you could turn this around, and you're not want to quit on something, you're not want to give up. So sometimes these are the very things that drive us to remain engaged and to be resilient, right? And to honor, the institution of marriage and all of these things. I think, like, it's not maybe one thing; it's a combination of all of these things on different days. So thank you for kind of like talking about that. But I guess now the next thing that I'm wondering about is, and Trina, you were starting to say this earlier, was that at what point in time did it start occurring to you then that, okay, where do you start, like, crossing over that line? There's a lot of gray area days, right? Like, it's not so black and white, I imagine, right? It doesn't just go one day, okay, this was the day I remember, or was it like that?
Well, can I just notice before she goes in, she said something really important before you asked that question, which was that she recognized that he was the victim, that was a victim too. And I think that's something that happens a lot for abusers, no matter what form of abuse they participate in, that there's this hard wiring there from their childhood experiences that has created either a trauma for them, or a distressing and disturbing event that was such a pivotal experience that left this lens of how they operate and see the world. And I think one of the most important lessons I know for myself, and then a lot of people I work with, and you probably see this for yourself, Tess, with women you've worked with and for yourself, is that no amount of love is going to help someone reach their potential. And you can't heal someone else. You can only stand by them. And we can only do our own healing. And I think that's one of the most difficult realizations to come to, because when you come to that moment that you can't love this person into a healthy relationship, that, like, it's such an overwhelming reality to come to. That is not a small detail, because then you're starting to conceptualize, are they going to meet their potential? And that's the thing, is everyone has such beautiful potential, but we don't always all meet our potential.
No, but I think the other thing that I didn't realize back then is that you shouldn't love someone and want to change them.
Right.
If you love someone, you should love them.
I was hoping you would go exactly.
I heard an interesting. Go ahead, finish your thought. But I heard an interesting saying about men and women, and when they get into marriages, and it was one of those kind of like satirical, comical kind of sayings that said something to the effect of, a woman marries a man seeing his potential of what he could be, and wants him to change, but he never does. A man marries a woman wanting her to stay exactly the way she is, and she changes. So it's interesting, the change that are seen from the two different perspectives. But you said something really interesting about not changing people and realizing that, and then there's even that element, right? That you think about going, when you then reflect on that a little further, when you're actually in that situation. I wonder, when you said that finally, or you thought that, you're like, yeah, I'm not here to change them. And then it was then a question of saying, do you accept this circumstance as the permanent way, or is that kind of like how it went?
Yeah, yeah. I think the thing is, like, with the change thing, we all change.
Yeah.
We grow and we change, but we should be growing and changing alongside each other. We shouldn't actually be wanting someone to change. I think just, yeah, it's important to sort of differentiate that point.
Yeah.
In terms of,
Evolving, or yeah.
yeah, yeah, and we should be supporting each other through that, right? But in
Yeah.
terms of like, when I noticed things were actually really, really bad, there was lots of moments in my life where I felt like it wasn't fair and it wasn't right. I would see men in the supermarket. This sounds ridiculous. So I'd see men in the grocery store with their carts, with their kids in the cart, like playing games with their kids, throwing them an apple, whatever it was. And I would feel so desperately sad.
Yeah.
So desperately sad that my daughters did not have that, and that he didn't have that either. He would take them out occasionally for a milkshake or something like that. It was all part of that cycle, showing me all the great stuff that he could do. But generally, he would not take them anywhere. He wouldn't engage with them. He didn't take them to their sports classes or ballet classes or anything like that. So there was this sadness, I guess, and that got more and more as the kids got older. But there was actually a pivotal moment that I can still remember. I can still see the road. I can still see the bus. I was driving past a school on a local road, and there was a bus pulled down in front of me.
How old were you at this point?
35.
Okay.
Right?
I was wondering if my math was the same as yours.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm 50 now. I just turned 50. Yeah, so I was 35 approximately, and this bus pulled down in front of me, and it had a picture on the back of the bus, and it was a woman holding a purse or a wallet, and she looked so, so sad and drawn, and it was actually an ad for financial abuse, for domestic violence. And this is, you've got to think back, this is 12, 13, 14 years ago. We
See a
weren't
billboard.
stuff. Yeah, it was like a really new concept for people. And it was at that moment that I thought, oh my goodness, I am experiencing domestic violence. And that's the power of education campaigns, right? So now, throughout the entire Western world, we have all of these education campaigns, and we're teaching people what this is, because it's all of these different things, like Muhammad was saying before. But yeah, there was a pivotal moment when I realised that it was domestic violence and not just an unhealthy, yucky relationship.
So that was your aha moment.
Yeah.
Did you say earlier that there were others who were beside you while you were going through this, or who were watching and observing, say bystanders, right? Let's call them that. Who, if you were to talk with them and say, ask them what they thought, what was going on, and they'd be like, yeah, she was definitely, we tried to tell her. Did you get any other signals from anywhere else other than what you saw yourself?
Unfortunately, there are lots of people now that say, oh, yeah, we didn't like the way he did that to you. We didn't like the way he treated you. Even friends of my parents, like my parents will come back and say, oh, Jono in the corner over there said that he never liked the way that guy treated you or the way he behaved. But no one said anything at the time.
No one says anything.
No. I mean, and some of my close friends, like my next door neighbor I was really, really close with, she saw a lot of stuff. She would see me sobbing and crying. She would take the kids into her house. I've got another friend who I turned up in the middle of the night, a kid on each hip, all of us in our pajamas. I was, sobbing my heart out. It was so awful. None of those people stood by to support me. None of them. Yeah. Like, it was only my family and my oldest friends. Those people that had seen that stuff just ran and hid, and they still don't talk to them to this day. They still don't talk to me. There's so much shame, I think, and it's so uncomfortable for bystanders because they thought he was a nice guy. Even though
what do you mean by shame? What do you mean? Like who?
I think
Who's
they were
ashamed? They're ashamed, or you're ashamed?
they were ashamed to have anything to do with me because I was a victim of domestic violence. That's the only way I can kind of work it out in my head, because why would you do that? And particularly, I know this is really gendered and sexist, but particularly as a woman, to do that to another woman, to leave her for dead when she's escaping a relationship that you've seen plenty of signs there that there's something not right in that relationship. But I think people are so embarrassed. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't know who to
I mean,
believe.
and this is not to
All of that kind of
justify,
stuff.
and just not to play the devil's advocate on that, but like, looking at their point of view, going, hey, look, that's none of my business. Somebody saying, even to the person who wants to tell you something, they might first say to somebody else, and then that person going, listen, don't go poking your nose in Tessa's life. I wouldn't want people poking their noses in our lives, telling us whether we should be together or not, or what. I could just see that kind of being a conversation, because it is awkward to them. They want to tell you, but is it shame or fear? I don't know what the right word is, but they could be sitting there thinking they misread the situation, or they're being nosy. Sometimes they've maybe even tried to tell somebody this, and they're told, mind your own business, okay? You don't know what he's like or what he's going through. And sometimes you get that response from the very, very person who's going through it, because you caught him at a different time.
Mm. It's awkward, but you always have to say something.
Yeah, and I think
it's really important to check in with people. Like, I think that's the thing. It's a level of discomfort you have to step through as a bystander, right? Oh, I don't really want to have this conversation, but you just need to do something and say something, anything.
And I know, and speaking to like some of the points that Muhammad was pointing to in this question there, I know in work where I'll run teen girl groups, for example, and we do it for a series of anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. And there's a lot of conversation over the course of that time around self-worth, self-value, coercive power and control dynamics. What does this look like? What are boundaries? What are boundary breaches? What does disrespect look like? What does control look like? What does appreciation look like? What does kindness truly look like? What does caring actually look like? And I think this is, I know for me, I wish we had more of that for our young people, because if they are aware of the sign, if you know better, we always do better in theory, right? And so knowledge is power. And if I've seen this shift even with young girls, like, because after you do this for a couple of years, they'll come back to you because you're in the same facility as them, and they'll be like, "Oh, miss, I saw this, and we saw this with this guy or this girl, and we called it out." And it's just helping people identify and put words to something that is usually not always palpable, right? Like, they might not have always seen him actually disrespect you. It might be just an energy where you change when they come in the room, and there's just this palpable shift in your behavior, like you've noticed with your daughters, that adaptive response, right? And I think that's a big piece of where we need to, for not just domestic abuse, but for suicidality, for anxiety, like, and everything is just learning how to have compassionate conversations through curiosity. Right. And sometimes with people who are going through domestic abuse, or I've seen this even in teenage relationships all the way to adult relationships, and it's the friends that are like, "Are you okay? I'm just checking in." And it might be a year down the road. It might be 6 years down the road. But the friend that checks in is the friend that they go to down the road to kind of get that support, because there's that connection, even though it's not always able to be nurtured because of controlling circumstances, right? So I don't know, like, what are your thoughts, like, and on your work you're doing with like early education and intervention, like what's happening there with that?
That's so true. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, as we say, really, because it comes down to, I do think that the culture and society is going to shift. There's so much work being done. Like, I see it across Europe, the UK, the States, Canada, Australia. There's so much work being done with young people now to teach them about consent, about respectful relationships, about these bystander interventions. I'm hitting people pretty late. And
Yeah.
it's interesting. It's kind of, in some ways, it makes me mad that those people didn't step in now. But I also do understand it, because I didn't even know what it was.
Right.
So how were they supposed to know what it was? Do you know what I mean? And I have to have some
Yeah.
compassion for them. But it's so important that we do this education piece generationally.
Yeah.
Every generation
Because it
needs.
can change the way you parent, right?
Yeah.
I know the way I've parented has changed as I've changed, right? And you correct things in your parenting. You're like, oh snap, I got that wrong.
Well,
Let's go back.
Even Tess was saying herself, like, you look, going back to her childhood and her upbringing, had never seen anything like this
Right.
before. So, it's interesting that you would think that if you'd never seen this, when you see it, you're like, no, this is not how it's supposed to be. But there are all these different ways in which, like, it's not a static environment. You're also being persuaded that it is okay. You already kind of know to yourself that it's not. And that's kind of also what I wanted to. You talked about shame and the feeling of shame. Did you have any such feelings yourself, that, like, this is my fault, or shame on me? Why would you feel shame? You're the one being, you're the one having to go through this. I want to understand that.
Well, I felt so stupid. How did I possibly get myself into that position? I was so embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a well-educated, privileged woman, right? As I said, I grew up in privilege. I grew up surrounded by love, kindness, nice things. We had enough money, all of that sort of stuff. How does a person that's that well educated and that got that nice support network around them of family and friends get themselves into that situation? It was embarrassing, really
And
embarrassing.
that's another anchor. And that's another anchor that just keeps you there from being able to do something about it.
What do you
Trina,
tell
you also,
them?
yeah, and Trina brought up an interesting point here as well about, like, self-worth. So, you start from a point where you know who you are. You're an educated person. You know what's what. You're intelligent. Then you find yourself here in this predicament, and it doesn't just happen in relationship. It happens in business, for example. Like, how did I let it get to this? And then there is coming to terms with, like, now, then there's this question that I know I've had to ask myself sometimes, and it's happened in business, for example, with me, but it happens everywhere. I notice that you're like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. And so your level of self, whatever you want to call it, worth, just drops. And you're at this very weak, vulnerable point where, even though you realize now I'm call it in the wrong, or I'm off center, you don't even know whether you have the knowledge or the resources of what it takes to get back to center. Did you have that feeling of, like, I don't want to use the word despair, but, like, don't know what to do now? What do I do?
Yeah, I was a shell of my former self. And it is interesting because one of my best friends, my closest friends, is a man that I met when I was 20, and they were my next door neighbours, he and his wife. And we are very, very good friends to this day, very close friends. He talks about getting Tess back. He's
Mm.
seen me from before I met my ex-husband right through the whole journey. And at times in our lives, we weren't like that connected that regularly. Do you know what I mean? But he's always been there on the sidelines. And he says he just saw me just wither away into this shell of myself. And he has been one of my biggest supporters to help get Tess back. I'm talking about, I'm sitting on the floor in the bathroom at 3 o'clock in the morning, scared, locked in the bathroom, and he's the one I call. That kind of
Yeah.
support. Like, he's literally just not left my side the whole time. And he definitely saw me come back from that broken person. One of the stories I sometimes share with people, it kind of sounds a little bit crazy, but when we'd finally separated properly, the house was sold, I went and bought myself a really little house And when I moved in, the dishwasher was broken. And I went to the local store to buy myself a new dishwasher. And I stood in this store and I was 100% convinced that there was no way I could choose a dishwasher. I would choose the wrong dishwasher. It would be the wrong brand. It would break. It would be the wrong color. It wouldn't fit in the hold, that I'd measured up. I was just so anxious about making that decision to buy a dishwasher. When eventually I had to decide, right? So I decided on what dishwasher I was going to buy and bought it. And this sounds ridiculous to me now, but I remember feeling so proud of myself.
Yes.
Because all of my autonomy, all of my decision-making had been taken away from me because I was told that I was stupid, I was dumb, I was never good enough. Nothing I could do was good enough. I couldn't iron his shirts well enough. I would wash the dishes and be told I had too much water coming out of the tap. I would turn the lights on wrong. I would have the air conditioning set wrong. Everything I did was wrong.
You can't do anything right.
No. So
this is like
a game changer.
And this is my favorite part now, because you just talked about where you were when you bought that dishwasher. I love that as a marker now. I love that. That's a great marker. Thanks for sharing that. And then you also shared how you were, crouched in your bathroom at 3 a.m. Like these 2 points. Now, at that moment, what did you then start to do? That's where did you start finding your power?
Yeah, start going into the discomfort to get out.
What was, try to recall for me if you can, this is like the golden stuff here, is there you were feeling worthless, completely unempowered, no power whatsoever. You've probably lost contact. You have no resources. You don't know who to call. Where did you start finding your power from?
I think a lot of it was my girls. I just realized that I had to pull myself together for those girls. They had no one. They didn't want to see their dad. Once we separated, well, they weren't very close to him before anyway. But once we separated and he started perpetrating even more and more acts of verbal abuse and threats of physical violence and all the rest of it in front of them, and did some horrible things to them as well. They just wanted nothing to do with him. And he, of course, wanted full custody with me to have no access to the children at all. So
this all happened after. When you were there. Yeah, but right at that moment, I'm just going to go back to that. Is that what you thought? I got to do this for them? So you you didn't even focus on yourself even at that point.
No.
You were focusing on the girls still, and you were doing it for them. Is that was what you would say in your case was where you the mother instinct? Is that what you tapped into?
Absolutely.
It's the leverage, right?
Absolutely.
The leverage to do well by them, because you had more to do well by them than you did for yourself.
That's the word, Trina. I'm trying to see where she found her leverage. Exactly.
Yeah.
So where was that was your leverage?
Yeah. My oldest daughter, when I left, my oldest daughter was 12. She'd started to go through puberty, and he was horrible to her, to the point where he didn't believe that period pain existed. He didn't believe that she should be able to use cream for her pimples or acne on her face. I was having to hide painkillers in her school bag where I knew I wouldn't find them because he didn't want her to take any painkillers. So he was starting to perpetrate abuse. I didn't know the word for it then, but he was starting to perpetrate more and more acts of abuse and violence on her. And I just realized that I could not let her grow up in that environment. I shouldn't have had to be so protective over her. And I also realized that I didn't want my girls to think that that was what love was.
Yeah.
Because it's not.
And so
that's their model now.
And so when you started to do this, was there a change you noticed in yourself? I feel strong all of a sudden. When someone goes to the gym, for example, and I can only because I can't relate directly, I'm trying to understand from a completely outside point of view to this, is sometimes you do something, you're like, that felt good. Yes, more. Or is that how the feeling went for you?
No.
Okay, good.
No.
So help me understand.
It actually gets scarier and scarier and scarier and scarier, and then feels good years later.
Yeah. Trina's
Okay.
right. It
So then where do you
absolutely
get your validation? Where do you get your confirmation that you're heading in the right direction? That's what I'm wondering.
from my friends. Andrew, I'll name him. Andrew was like my rock, and my parents. Like they were really the three people that kept me on track and stopped me from going back. It was horrible. It was so awful. There were so many times when I thought I would have been better off going back into that than what happened afterwards. It was them. I mean, I've got to be honest. I was not strong enough to resist the comfort in that horrible situation because I knew the situation. I knew I could control the situation. I knew that if I did certain things and behaved in certain ways, it wouldn't be too bad. It wouldn't be that awful. So it really, I'm very, very grateful to them for pulling me through it and supporting me through it. I know I had to do it myself, and I know everyone says you were so strong, and yeah, I was strong. But when I left, it was definitely it was a boundary setting exercise, if you want to say it like that. It was.
And was it something gradual, or did you just have to say like cut it right here?
It was
How did you do it?
It was exhausting because it was putting up really the boundary after boundary after boundary, and the same boundary had to be reiterated multiple times. It was
Are
learning.
you able to share like when you say boundary, help me understand?
Like, you're not allowed to text message me 150 times a day anymore. You're not allowed to email me 200 times a day anymore. No, you can't just show up at the house and demand to see the children. This is not how this works. No, I ended up having to get domestic violence orders. They're called protection orders here, intervention orders. I don't know what they're called in Canada, but
there's simply we have different court orders, restraining orders, and there's conditions. When people are at that point where at the place of getting the orders or a restraining order, or there's a potential charge that may be pending, people will often go back, like speaking to what you were saying, because even though it was horrible, there's comfort in the familiar, right? And we see this with all types of abuse and all types of maladaptive behavior. So things that we are doing that are not even necessarily good for ourselves, like over drinking or overspending, whatever we indulge in that's not necessarily good for us, is we repeat these habits and we stay locked into these ways of living because the comfort of knowing you knew what you could do. I knew I could control this, which you totally had no control. But that's exactly what the story we tell ourselves, right? Because there's a lot of comfort in what's familiar, and this unfamiliar world where his violence escalated, his abuse escalated after separation. That is unfamiliar and incredibly discomfortable or uncomfortable, right? So, it's just such a huge piece of it, the comfort and the familiar, I think.
Was there a point in time, or after how long, or at what point in time, and you could say whether it's in terms of milestones or in terms of actual time that it took, where you started actually then finding you would say your strength to carry yourself forward?
When I really started to feel like I'm okay, I'm relatively safe, and I can finally start to do what I want to do in life and focus some of my energy on things that I want to do, was about 5 years after separation.
You said earlier on in our conversation, you said today you look back at it and did I hear you say that you look at it as a gift?
Yeah.
So now it's first like this level, then there's empowerment, then there's looking back at the whole thing and saying it was a gift. Help me reconcile that, please, because I don't see it.
Yeah, it's a gift because it's given me a new career path, a new focus on life. I'm sitting here with you. This is pretty incredible for me. I'm just some lady, just some random Australian woman who happened to go through domestic violence like millions and millions of other Australian women, and here I am with you. The gift was that about 5 years post-separation, so around about 6 years ago, I started to realise that I had had privileges in escaping that violence that many, many other women and men don't have, but mainly women. And that I could do something with that knowledge that I had, an intimate knowledge of the system and of the court processes and things through an unfortunate circumstance. I've had to go through it several times. But I realised that I could turn that into something positive and start to help other people. So I joined a domestic violence subcommittee at my workplace at the time. And that was my first step towards what I'm doing now. You could never have told me 6 years ago that I'd be doing what I'm doing now. I now run.
Were you trained? What were you trained in before?
Marketing communications. I actually did.
Oh, wow.
I did photojournalism. That was what I wanted to be when I was young, was a photojournalist. And I ended up doing marketing and communications. And, now I run a lot of my work, not all of it. I'm doing a whole lot of work around sexual harassment in the workplace and things like that at the moment. But
you know how to market it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of my work is running training and supporting people. So I run this bystander training through my real job, which is a job in government in Australia. I have a real job, and that a lot of that involves this bystander training. Then I also do some contract work for a domestic violence organisation where I run specialist DV training. Now, what I bring to that and other people bring to that is actually special and unique, because when you can tell people, when you can give examples from your own life, you can stand there as a happy, healthy person who's escaped this. You send a really strong message to people that they can get out of it. And you have this intimate knowledge that you can help people. Now, I love my job. I love both my jobs. It's tiring at times and it's confronting at times, but I genuinely love what I do, and I love the feeling of walking out of all of those training sessions and knowing that I might have just changed one person's mind. That's enough for me.
Yeah.
It's enough for me.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm making a real difference to people, and that is the gift that he gave me, because if I'd not married him, I wouldn't have had that experience, and I would have just probably been doing some, to me, and I'm not being rude, but some boring comms job, right? This is not boring at all. The other gift, obviously, that I got is my two beautiful, amazing daughters that I've raised pretty much single-handedly, and they're incredibly kind, compassionate, loving humans. They have been through a massive journey themselves. They've had, obviously, to go through that journey with me. We've all had a lot of counselling over the years and stuff, but they are on these amazing career trajectories. They're both doing so well career-wise, but more importantly, they are kind, compassionate humans who will not tolerate people doing the wrong thing to them or to other people, and they will stand up and speak out. And both of them have supported friends that have gone through similar situations. So that's an immense gift. It's a gift for me to have the pleasure of being their mother. I was fully convinced that I was shielding my children from this while I was married. I was convinced that I was like the brick wall there, and I was helping to make sure that they didn't know that this stuff was going on. Nothing could be further from the truth. So
no. They're masterful. They pick up everything.
Yeah, they do. Like my daughter was years later told me how she was lying awake in her bed every night and she barely slept for years.
Yeah.
Because she was listening to what was going on in the living room. So don't stay in a relationship that's unhealthy, toxic or abusive because of the children. And you hear that all the time, that people stay with their children. Your children do not need to learn that love is horrible, and that's the message they get. If they go to school, the school teachers will say, Mummy and Daddy love each other, or Mummy and Mummy love each other, or whatever it is. So they think that that's love. It's not okay. And it's not love. And
it's amazing how many times
they hear.
It's amazing how many times I've heard people say that they don't want to get married. And when I ask them, like, really, it's a beautiful thing. It's a great experience in life, and they're like, yeah, I've seen it happen, and no, I don't want to go there. And I didn't understand, like, at first, because again, lucky for me, Hey, every family has like levels of. This is the part that I want to ask and get your guidance on, and like again from your personal experience. So, like, at what point in time do you draw the
Sorry.
line between go on between
Sorry.
dysfunctionality, right? Like there's dysfunction in so many things in relationships. Where do you now draw the line? And now that you do this to help others, where do you draw the line between dysfunction and abuse?
It's the presence of fear.
Presence of
That's my line. And
I,
anxiety, like it's this constant level of anxiety that people have.
Yeah, a hypervigilance.
Yeah, but
and
it's
when you
fear is part of it, I think.
Yeah, fear's huge.
so that's interesting because even the presence of fear, like as you're talking, I'm thinking about my my relationship with my wife, who, we're married, we came up on like 26 years now, and me and the boys sometimes were like, hey, keep it down. You don't want to get your mom upset at the volume on the TV being too loud late at night because we don't want to wake her up. That's not fear.
No,
No.
it
Well,
doesn't
that's my
sound like
point. But like we're afraid. We're like we're gonna get all in trouble. We're gonna get yelled at. And rightfully so. Like it was too loud. But that's what I'm saying. That is fear in some ways because we're like, shh, keep it quiet. So I also want to have clarification on to what extent, fear, and to what extent is it respect, to what extent is it, like consideration, right? So those are like a few different elements. What would you say to that?
well, that a relationship needs to have equality and respect, and then you don't have the presence of fear. So if you're scared that you're going to wake your wife up with the TV being too loud, and you're genuinely scared, then you're not going to turn the TV up. That's the first thing. But if you accidentally did, she would be coming out like raging at you and having power over you. If you're just scared of waking her up because you know that she's going to be a bit grumpy in the morning, or come out and say, "Oh, could you turn that down, Mohammed? It's really annoying." That's not fear. That's a
No.
word we use words like.
That's living with people.
Well,
And
that's what
you
I
can
want to
say, "Oh,
clarify
I'm a bit
for
frightened."
people who are listening. Yeah, because it
Yeah.
can be interpreted as that, right?
Yeah, oh, I'm scared of what he's going to do if he finds out I haven't done the dishes. Well, we
Oh,
can all say
Like
stuff
you're
like
scared you're gonna get hit, belittled. Like
yeah.
it's an
I
embodied feeling that will
I
stop
use it.
you.
I use it all the time with my boys. I'm like, listen, guys, if you don't do this, we're going to get in trouble. And then I'm going to get yelled at for you guys not listening. So you guys better do this. And my wife is a sweetheart. Like, if anyone meets her, she's
Why
like,
are you throwing her under the
that.
bus like that?
I'm not
First
throwing
of
her under the
all,
bus.
why don't you just tell them what to do?
Because we're boys, we're busy playing, and we're like, listen, we're going to get in trouble with mom.
I,
So we better go. You better go do this. I wanted to clarify it to people that that's not fear, and I wanted to hear you say it, Tess, because that's actually a form of love. Actually, like
yeah,
we want her to be
You don't
happy,
want to upset someone you
and
love.
we're like,
Yeah.
oh man, if your mom starts, then we're going to have to hear about it. You know,
I can I make a suggestion? Those conversations, I
yes.
reckon, should be turned around into, we all love mum, right? And we know that she needs to get some sleep because she has to get up early to go to work tomorrow, or she needs to go to, grandma's 50th birthday, whatever it happens to be. I don't know. But we all love mum, we all respect mum, and we don't want mum to have a bad night's sleep. So let's keep the TV down.
Yeah.
So now flip it the other way around. What if it was the mom saying to the kids, careful now. You see how, and by the way, I want to bring this up because I think I met a guy, I was telling you, Tess, the other day, that who I met, who wanted to take an office, and he was starting a not-for-profit for men who are in domestic abusive relationships. And he says it's staggering, the number
Yeah.
that's out there that, and for men, again, he said that it's even harder to deal with because gosh, like you're the one getting beaten up by your wife. There's this, you talk about the element of shame and
Yeah.
to
There's a
how to
stigma
deal with
attached
it.
to
That,
that.
oh my God, really? You couldn't handle the situation and all of the machoisms that we got to deal with and live with. And it's even according to him, harder. And he goes, the stats are just buried because as soon as you bring it up, the ones that make the rules and influence the rules are women, and they already have this kind of like hate on men. So men get absolutely no support. So shout out to the guys as well, and let them know, and I wanted to have you talk a little bit on that, Tess, in terms of not just something that you would see being done to women, but many different types of relationships where there's abuse to children. Tess, Trina, you talked about geriatric abuse and abuse on men. Can you spend some time a little just giving us like, your thought on that and again, how to equate it? Because if it was, oh gosh, don't get your father mad, immediately sometimes the image could be the guy storming down, really mad, and now that's considered fear mongering from the guy when the guy does it. But how about the mom say, listen, guys, you want to have dad have a good morning tomorrow? Like, when does that turn from, guys consider, your mom or your dad to, the presence of real, fear and a lack of respect? I like that you use those sort of, references there to kind of really make a balanced answer on it.
I would say this. I would say it's exactly the same. Like for a mum and the kids doing that same thing. It's the same message that, we love dad and dad's really tired because dad's had a hard day at work. So we're going to keep the TV down because we respect dad. So I don't think that's any different. In terms of men's experience of domestic violence and women's experience of domestic violence, it's absolutely men experience violence. And they experience in high numbers just like women do. There are barriers to reporting for both genders because there's so much shame attached to it. But there are additional barriers faced by men, which are exactly the things that you said. Men are encouraged to be strong, to be tough. You don't seek help. You don't go to the doctor. You can do it all on your own, right? So you're going to see yourself also as a failure if you go and say, oh, this woman did this to me, because society has built these expectations for us about what a man is and what a woman is, right? And the man is supposed to be in control, supposed to be the head of the household, supposed to be the breadwinner. So your female partner is not supposed to be the one that's in control. So there are those barriers to reporting that. Men and women experience violence in different ways, in that both genders, and to be gender inclusive, anyone who identifies with any gender can experience violence. And in fact, the rates are very, very high in our LGBTIQ plus relationships. But in terms of we're looking at men and women, we all experience those coercive and controlling and manipulative behaviours, those emotional behaviours. But women are far more likely to experience lethality and hospitalisation, so that physical side of violence. So it is a different experience for us. But I think I was saying to you, Mohammed, there's very, very few services in Australia. I'm not sure what it's like in Canada, but for men who are fleeing violence, there's all sorts of extra complications. There are even issues with getting teenage boys into women's like we have these domestic and family violence shelters, and they're called women's and children's shelters.
Yeah.
And they won't even accept, some of them won't accept boys past the age of 14 in there because they're considered to be men. So there's huge structural reforms that need to take place. But one of those things is more support for men who are experiencing it, and more support and understanding for men who are using violence in their relationships, so that they can feel safe and come out and talk about it and go through a behavioural change process. Because the other thing we know is that men who are violent towards women will go on to perpetrate that violence in multiple relationships. So until we see that behavioural change piece kick in, we're sort of...
And maybe not just violence, just abuse of any kind.
Yeah, when I say violence, that's what I mean.
It's all of it. Yeah, it's all of it.
Right. Sorry.
So
no, I see violence as everything.
Yeah. And so, like, last thought, really, Tess, after what you've been through, and you talked about there being leverage that you found and support that you had through people. I imagine that there are people out there who don't have or don't feel like that they have that support, or don't know where to look, don't have that friend that you had, or your parents. Sometimes they've been that
isolated.
Isolated, right, is the word. what do you say to them? Where could they find their power? Where do they get their leverage?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really, really hard for people, but there are a lot of support services out there for people, no matter what country or what state or what city or what town you live in. There are definitely support services that can help you with safety planning and things like that. I think the important thing is to make sure that you wrap support around you. I was fortunate in that I already had this structure there. But if you don't have that structure, if you work, go and talk to your workplace about what supports they might have available. They might be able to give you leave. They might be able to facilitate moving you to a different location away from the person who's using the violence. There's all sorts of supports out there, but it's important that people conduct some safety planning before they leave. So don't just watch an ad on TV and think, oh, that's happening to me, and think that you'll be safe to leave. Unfortunately, as we talked about, the post-separation violence being so significant, it's really important that people have got their bank accounts in order, that they've changed their passwords on
their identity
device, made sure that they've got copies of all their important documents, all of that sort of stuff. And most websites now where you get support around domestic and family violence or intimate partner violence will have a quick escape button on them, but it's often not safe for them to use their own computer or their own phone. If you can, find a friend, go to a friend.
Go to a library or friends.
Go to work, tell someone you trust at work so they'll let you use an office to access things. Do be very careful about those devices because they're often being unfortunately being tracked.
There's a million different ways to track them. Every time I learn of one way, there's something else.
Yeah.
That they're like data mining and getting access to information. It's wild. It's something that we can barely keep up with. But it's kind of like there's a lot of planning before the actual leaving.
Yeah.
There's a lot of planning.
It's a daunting thing just thinking about it and when they're there. So again, another anchor why they might be like, there's a give up point. What do you say to somebody to not give up?
You're worth more than that.
Yeah.
You're worth being loved. We're all deserving of love and we're all deserving of respect. I really can't stand that saying, he or she earned my respect. We don't have to earn respect. Respect is a baseline, okay? We can do things that can cause disrespect, but respect is your baseline. That's your starting point. And everybody in the world deserves to be respected and loved, and nobody deserves to live with violence. Nobody asks for that to happen with them. Nobody asks them to be abused. And if you've got kids, your kids deserve more too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. That's powerful. Thank you for the time, Tess. Despite distance, despite time zones, here we are. Despite everything you've been through, here we are. Thank you so much for sharing and talking through your experience. I know you might have done it a few times, but to hear you do it the way you did it with us, I really appreciate it.
I think it's fantastic what you're doing. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of it. Like, I feel really, really privileged to have been invited to be part of it.
The privilege to have you.
Yeah, the feeling is very mutual. Very mutual.
Yeah.